Hello, everybody, and happy Tuesday of the second week of courses, which is pretty good. We made it through the first week, and that's what's important. Most of you may have figured out that on Mondays, I spend most of my time on my online courses grading or getting assignments together. Then on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I distribute my three classes mostly evenly across those three to do things like, well, make a video or to write a test or do something that is major and important for you all. And yes, sometimes even read the assignment that you are reading as well. But today we are, starting at the beginning. And so we're starting with the things I've pretty much got burned into my brain since I started studying rhetoric when I was 19, 20, somewhere in my sophomore or junior year of college. So it's pretty exciting for me to get to talk about this every single semester. However, that also means it gets rather boring. So every 2 or 3 years, I record new videos and new lectures so that they don't get boring or old or irrelevant, because in the past, about decade, things have gotten irrelevant probably every other year or so. And there's no point in wasting our time on that. Even though we are looking at the history a bit, we're looking at the history of the development of rhetoric. So throughout the semester and starting today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the main themes that were happening in the study of rhetoric at the time period that we're working with. Today, it just so happens to be pretty much pre-Platonic, I say Platonic, that's not the word, Platonistic thought, because this is Isocrates and Gorgias, who are sophists who have been around or had been around at some time for some time at this point. Now, we're probably talking about 500 BCE, 600 BCE, somewhere in there. And you read the book, so you know the exact precise, or a little more precise idea of where that's at in the timeline. So let's first start with, who the heck were the sophists? The sophists were a group of people that would travel from town to town, usually, and they would aid citizens or even non-citizens, but people who could afford them. They would aid them in either writing a speech or performing legal duties or speaking for them on their behalf. In other words, today we would call a sophist a teacher or a lawyer. Generally speaking, that's what they would be doing in our modern times. Sophists have existed longer than any other group of people that we're going to study. Okay, they're constantly present. They never go away. If you're wondering what the difference is then between someone like me and a sophist today, let me give you an example I think is pretty good. When I went to the University of Oklahoma in 1999, I met a woman there named Michelle, and she and I were both working on our PhDs. Me in political communication and rhetoric, her in interpersonal and family communication. Now, what's interesting is we both had similar backgrounds. We were both debaters. We both had a love for the law and for democracy. But she chose to study families and conflict, which I understand because she came from a different background than I did. So while my priorities were more social, her priorities were more understanding the family. So we did our first year together, and then I moved on to the University of Missouri. She stayed and finished her degree at the University of Oklahoma and then took a job in Hawaii. This all sounds very nice so far, doesn't it? Dr. Love, as she was called at the time, was, living it up in Hawaii, and she did a year over in England, and she fell in love with London, and she wanted to live there. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to get a visa to London. Well, it was in 2002, I believe this was. So she was having a difficult time getting what she wanted. So ultimately, despite being tenured, despite being this good, good professor, great researcher. She literally quit the academy, picked up all of her things, moved to Seattle, Washington, where, and I quote, the weather is better. Again, I say she loved London. And she started working for a boutique marketing company doing market analysis. And then I thought, man, she's never going to be happy doing that. She studies families. She's interested in relationships. What is she doing? And then, she started her own business. And now she basically gives motivational speeches to people who want to give motivational speeches. In other words, she coaches people on how to coach others. It's a little bit complicated in my mind because, and here's why, she's not really doing a whole lot of original stuff. And she's making literally 3 or 4 times what I make in a year. And in a weekend, she could pull down what it could take me a semester to earn, financially speaking. So she is paid a lot of money. Some people would say I'm paid a lot of money. She makes about, like I said, about 4 times more than I do. So hopefully you think that's more. And the money I make, I feel good about. I feel like I earn it. I talk to a lot of students about some of the basic core ideas of communication, and I research, and I do all of the jobs I'm supposed to do. And I make about $70,000 a year if I teach in the summer. Not too shabby. She, on the other hand, gives a few lectures and designs a website about finding your sparkle and is paid an enormous amount of money, more than I make. What's my point? Sophists always made more money than rhetoricians or philosophers. They always seem to be richer, have more material goods than people like, Aristotle, Plato. Okay. And because they were paid more to say things like how to show your sparkle instead of here are the basic ethical tenets of a speech and of a rhetorical, persuasive message, people got a little jealous. I'm jealous. I'm very jealous of what she does, except I could never write an entire blog post, let alone anything else on how to find your sparkle. That's just not who I am. So she and I joke all the time that we were both trained almost exactly the same way. She makes money, I don't. She talks about finding your sparkle. I talk about the 3 artificial proofs from Aristotle, and my students get degrees, and her people make more money for themselves, and perhaps there is an ethical question in there of which one of us is doing the better job. The truth of the matter is we're both very good at our jobs. She just chose one path and I chose another. Back to 600, 500 BCE, same debate started happening. The people who were considered sophists, practicing sophistry, were teaching people how to get through, say, one court case, particularly during the land wars, right? They were teaching people how to go to court to defend themselves or to protect their land or to claim land. Fantastic. If they didn't do that, they spoke for you, thereby making them teachers and lawyers. Not so bad. The problem is that what they taught was essentially how to get through that one moment. It's sort of like if you go to court and you decide to represent yourself and you're like, hey, how do I get out of this ticket? And 4 of your friends give you really good advice and you go in and you get out of the ticket. The next time you go in, those same arguments will not work, because it's going to be a different judge, a different ticket. In other words, the situation that you're going to find yourself in is going to be different. And therefore, sophists really only taught people how to get through one moment, one particular task to get done, instead of teaching them the process of how to repeat that throughout more than one event, more than one instance. Okay? So that's my modern day distinction between a sophist and a rhetorician. And hopefully that helps a little bit. I think you might know a lot of these people, the people who practice what we practice for the purpose of getting money, not for the purpose of teaching others how to have better experiences in life, or however you want to define that. Personally, I like teaching. But sometimes I have to admit, I sit back going, she lives in Seattle in a really nice brownstone, and she's doing what she wants when she wants. But you know what? I don't really have the motivation or the creativity that she does. Instead, I know the rules of the game and how to play them. And so that's what I like to teach people, so that when you leave here, you don't just know how to get out of a parking ticket or whatever it is that you need to get out of, but you know that no matter what challenge you face, no matter what audiences you face, no matter what persuasive message you're trying to send, whether that's through a public relations campaign, whether it's a political campaign, whether it's a commercial on TV, whether you're designing some sort of media for a company, no matter what it is, you're able to follow the basic rules and principles of rhetoric in order to be successful. So why does that matter here? Gorgias and Isocrates were sophists. They were paid to teach others how to speak in one instance, and they were also paid to speak on behalf of their clients. Now, Gorgias is really the first piece of rhetoric that we look at, and therefore that's interesting enough. The encomium on Helen is a eulogy, right? An encomium is a eulogy, but an encomium establishes the history and therefore the way we should future think about the dead. In this case, we're talking about the legacy of Helen of Troy, which is neat. And if I were going to choose to write a eulogy, I don't know that it would be on Helen, but Gorgias had a very specific reason for doing this. He was sick and tired of people blaming the war on Helen. It wasn't her fault. The lips that sunk 1,000 ships, not her fault. It wasn't her fault that she was beautiful and that Paris came and took her and that she went with him and that it violated the rules of law and that Troy ended up winning that war. And none of that is her fault. So he was sick and tired of hearing people blame Helen. Well, what did they do? What did he do? He rewrote her legacy by writing the eulogy. Now, what's important there is for us to understand that any speech that we give in any instance for any moment can last beyond that situation. In his case, he was hoping it would. And it has stood this, the test of history, as they say. The question is, why shouldn't we blame Helen for that war? And that's where things get a little bit fascinating for me. He talks about, I'm assuming you read it already or that you're in the middle of reading it, so this should help you identify some of these things. But one of the things he says is that Helen shouldn't be blamed because she's just a woman. She doesn't have the brain to figure out that she shouldn't go with Paris. And, let's face it, I believe he calls Paris silver-tongued, that he was able to speak with such eloquence and such beauty as to woo Helen. He also blames love. He says that love, and keep in mind the capital L on this, love is at blame because it dictated this to Helen. She had no choice. And right along with love is the capital F, fate. They saw these emotions or these concepts as gods in of themselves, as actors that could force things to happen. And we can blame things on fate or on love or on hatred or whatnot, things we don't blame now because we have a responsibility for them. But way back then, I mean, they didn't have a concept of where these things came from, right? So they blamed them, and he blamed Paris and the fact that Helen was just not that smart, and she was smitten by Paris's use of language. They don't talk about how handsome Paris was. Come on, Orlando Bloom played him in the movie, who I don't find all that attractive unless he has long blonde hair, blue eyes, and his name is Legolas, right? But hey, he was a handsome man. So it's not Helen's fault. We need to remember Helen as she was, which was a beautiful inspiration, and the wife of the king, not as the woman who caused the war. Fascinating. Why is it important? Changing the entirety of someone's legacy is a responsibility that even you may have one day. If you've ever given a eulogy for anyone or written an obituary for someone, you are in charge of their immortality. You are telling people what they need to remember about the person who has died. We don't focus on the terrible things or the bad things or even the questionable things they may have done. We don't talk about bad things that happened to them. No, we focus on the good and those things that we should remember. A more modern example of this is found in the eulogy that then President Clinton gave when Richard Nixon died, President Nixon. He didn't talk about how Nixon was the greatest traitor since Benedict Arnold, who, by the way, wasn't really that much of a traitor, but that's beside the point. That's for your history classes. He did not talk about how he started the greatest campaign of distrust by the American people of the government. He did not talk about how he allowed himself to be recorded and he committed crimes in those recordings. He did not talk about that. He talked about the great work that Richard Nixon did in foreign policy. He talked about how Richard Nixon helped establish the America First or American exceptionalism in a way of how strong and powerful we were in the world. All right. So of course he did that. You don't stand there. I mean, sure. After maybe you've gone to a party or you've tossed back a few drinks or whatever your vice is, you start talking about how terrible President Nixon was. You can feel free to do that. But in the eulogy, he's established as one of the greatest foreign policy presidents in our entire history. And that's accurate. So while it might be accurate that Helen started a war, it's also accurate that she did not act alone. And it was accurate that she was beautiful. And it was accurate that she remained loyal to her king. Much like, even though it is in fact accurate to say that Richard Nixon violated the trust of the American citizenry, even though we can say that he was busted doing some terrible, treasonous almost deeds, what we don't do is ignore that he also increased our standing in the world stage. He reestablished some foreign policy relationships that we didn't have before, and that he was ultimately, in that light, a good leader. Okay? So, according to Gorgias, rhetoric has the ability to redefine the way that we look at the reality of a situation. Okay? We can make something that was maybe seen as terrible look not so terrible anymore. And some people will say later that this means that we're liars when we practice rhetoric. I'm going to explain to you why that's not the case. It's going to take me a little while to do that, though. So, over the next few weeks at least. But he gives us a way of looking at rhetoric that is not only different from a courtroom or different from only telling the facts or from not attempting to recreate the image or the history or the legacy of someone. But in the end, in that last paragraph, he also says something else. He says that if nothing else, he enjoyed writing this. Rhetoric is supposed to be enjoyable. It gives us some feeling of accomplishment or some feeling of joy that we're able to tell the story in the first place, that we're able to potentially persuade many people to interpret an event or a person or an idea in the way that we do. And if you think about it, that's pretty much all we ever do when we're practicing persuasion. We're just trying to say, hey, look at this from the perspective where it's good. That's why when you listen to a commercial about, I don't know, pick your poison. My favorite right now is Jardiance. Jardiance is a miracle pill for me, and yet the side effects are pretty darn interesting. I mean, they're not logical and they're not pleasant. They're not the worst thing, but they're also definitely not good, right? And if you watch a Jardiance commercial, it's a drug, obviously. There's the list of side effects on there that's just unbelievable. Kind of like when they sell you a diet pill and say, by the way, one of these side effects could potentially be weight gain. I love that. I love when they do that. So, but what we're saying is that more often than not, this pill helps you lose weight. More often than not, you will not experience these side effects from Jardiance. More often than not, we should see Richard Nixon as a contributor to foreign policy. And more often than not, we should definitely find someone else to blame for the Trojan War. Do you see how that works? I hope so. And here's the interesting thing. Like I said, at the end, he says he enjoyed doing this. And you all are probably like, who enjoys that crap? Think about who enjoys it. Film critics, market analysts, creative writers, people who give eulogies, people who give toasts at weddings. I don't know about your family, but toasts in my family when I was, younger and we weren't all married yet, were hilarious. We used to spend weeks planning these things. It's enjoyable. Public speaking is supposed to be enjoyable because it's about you sharing a piece of you that helps influence an audience, hopefully in a positive way. So, what do we get from Gorgias? We get that rhetoric is useful for redefining or reinterpreting events, things, concepts, ideas, and thoughts. We get that it's for a much larger audience. It's for mass influence. I mean, we're still reading this eulogy today. It is supposed to be enjoyable. But above all, and this is probably the most important lesson coming out of the Encomium on Helen, it should be ethical. It should be ethical. In other words, you should tell the truth. And even if you couch that truth in a specific way, it must be the truth, because you can say, well, Richard Nixon did commit crimes. Yes, he did. And you can say, and Richard Nixon did force mistrust of the American people, and you'd be correct. But you also can say Richard Nixon was one of the best foreign policy presidents we had in our history, and that would also be correct. So it's not about lying. It's not about making crap up. Sometimes it is about making things sound good. And in the end, I have to ask, what's wrong with that? I've got 3 huge fluorescent, cool blue lights on me right now to make me look slightly better than I would without them. We do this all the time. We dress things up. We make them look better than they are. If we're trying to sell a product, we do that. Does anybody here know what Scentsy is? Does anybody here know what Mary Kay is or Avon? Well, I can tell you this. My aunt sells Avon. I sold Mary Kay. And a friend of mine right now sells Scentsy. And I got to tell you, she is relentless. She's relentless. She's gotten me to spend over $150 in the last month on Scentsy, which is, I don't understand it. I mean, I like smelly things. So does my husband. So does my daughter. But like we've tried aromatherapies, right? We've tried wax melts, of course. We've tried air fresheners. We've tried all these different things that we enjoy. And I don't mean like our house stinks like garbage and we need to cover it up. I mean, like we enjoy the smell of certain things. My husband loves the smell of honeysuckle. I love the smell of magnolia. My daughter likes the smell of lavender, right? We're all different, but we like the same thing. So I ordered my daughter a ceramic bird that she wanted or that she likes that melts stuff in it. I bought my husband a little Zen rock that melts things in it. I bought myself a little tin can with a sunflower on it to actually diffuse oil in my kitchen. And I thought, okay, I'm good. I spent all of my Christmas stuff getting Scentsy for some people. And then yesterday she messages me and she says, hey, you've got to check these out. I need you to reserve it right now if you want it, though, because there's very, very few. I hope you're sitting down. It's a sloth stuffed animal that comes with a smelly Scentsy bar of your choice. I bought 2. And the question is why? Part of it is that, I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel guilty. This woman I met when I was, oh gosh, it's been like 15 years. I was down at the casino in Oklahoma a lot when it first opened. And she was a blackjack dealer and I loved being at her table. She was just a lot of fun. So I always thought, oh, she's a blackjack dealer. She doesn't make a lot of money. She lives in Miami, Oklahoma, or wherever it was that she was living at the time. And she's still in Oklahoma somewhere. And oh, I always feel bad, like that she needs money. So there's my personal guilt. And then there's also the fact that she knows what I like. Sloth. So she got me, And is she telling me, these things won't last forever? Is she telling me the ceramic bird might break if you drop it? Is she telling me that the sloth is this big? I don't even know how big it is. No, she's telling me all the good things that I want to hear about it. We sometimes call salespeople unethical, but they're generally speaking not. Unless you're buying a car. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. From certain dealerships, I won't lie to you. I've had 2 incredibly terrible experiences buying cars. One in Minnesota and one right up in, what's the name of that town? I don't even remember the name of the town. Fairgrove, something like that. It was a Dodge dealership. I'll never go back. But the point is that salespeople are not always just out to lie to you any more than politicians are and any more than rhetoricians are. Some rhetoricians are terrible people. Some rhetoricians will give you bad information. Some politicians lie to you. Some salespeople will sell you something that you can't afford, but they get you to think you can anyway. These things, of course, they happen. If we listen to Aristotle, by the way, in a couple of weeks when we talk about him, he will tell you that is not rhetoric. That's lying and that's coercion. And maybe you think it's some form of persuasion, but it is not rhetoric. All right. So we get the idea that rhetoric is enjoyable, that it can redefine, and that it requires an ethic of truth. That's what we get from Gorgias. which is going to set us up nicely for looking at Isocrates. Now, Isocrates, as I said, was a sophist. He was a practicing sophist. He worked with one of the sophist schools. He traveled, he took money, etc., until I don't know how old he was, but he was somewhere in midlife, I imagine, when he thought, why am I, this isn't okay. I don't like what these people are doing. My colleagues are lying and overcharging, and they're teaching people how to get through one experience, and that's it. That's not okay. These people are going to need to go back to court. They're going to need to go back to give a eulogy, or they're going to be accused of something they have to defend themselves from, or they're going to need to accuse somebody of doing something. All of these things require a rhetorical act, requires your understanding of rhetoric. In fact, I mean, keep in mind that prior to this, in the Phoenician Wars, I believe it was the Phoenician Wars, a history buff can correct me on that, during the times of great wars, there were, the way that you determined if you won a war was by how much land you took. And so if, let's say, for example, I'm just going to use the Trojans and the Spartans. That's just my easiest, clearest example. So let's say that the Trojans went and took a majority of the land from Sparta. That would mean that the Trojans now own that land, they won the war, and they get to take that land. Well, let's think for a moment about the fact that during the wars, there are the Spartans had taken some land from the Trojans. Now, the Spartans lost the war, so they should surely have to give up that land, right? But we don't know that yet. We haven't established that yet. So they would go to court and they would argue over who should have that land. And if you're thinking, how could anybody possibly win that argument? It's pretty easy, actually. Let's say that you are a Spartan who you had your family in your home this whole time, and the Trojans came along and said, we won the war, but your home and your family were never touched. Why can't you still live there? Why is that not your land? So these were some of the debates that were going on. And so courts had to figure this out. When I say courts, we're talking about the most remedial, basic beginnings of our court systems. Okay, the most basic. We needed lawyers. We needed a judge. All sorts of weird things started developing. All of a sudden, out of thin air, we have a need for this. So we invented it. Humans are awesome. However, these days, it goes a little differently because we have sort of rules of war, right, that already establish what's going to happen when one wins and one doesn't. But back then they didn't. And I'm often reminded of the story that, I don't think it's true. I believe that this is just something that oral tradition has handed down. But according to legend, there were two people. There was Corax and there was Tisias. And Corax was a teacher. He was a sophist. And Tisias, his student. I believe I have this correct. It might be in your book and you might correct me, but I believe this is correct. And Corax taught Tisias the ways of rhetoric. Well, when it was over, Tisias said he had spent all this money to learn how to be a good rhetorician. And he didn't learn. So he took Corax to court. And Corax said, listen, I taught him everything that I possibly could have taught him. I earned the money that I was given for his learning. If you don't believe me and you think I lose, that proves that Tisias learned enough to beat his teacher. And therefore I win anyway. And Tisias stood up and said, wait a minute. No, I paid you a lot of money to teach me how to be a great rhetorician. And if you don't believe me, if the court thinks that Corax wins, that only proves that he did not teach me well enough to defeat him, thereby proving that I deserve to win. What did the judge do? I have no idea. All I know is that this created a very specific point about rhetoric. And that is when you have two opposing forces coming together, Corax is right, Tisias is right, and they're equally matched, that in between there, right, you have stasis, as I talked about, I believe, in a previous video. And so we're left in stasis until somebody makes a choice. And I have no idea. I don't know who I'd root for. I think I would probably root for Corax, but then I'm thinking, you probably charge too much. And then I'm like, but Tisias, you're kind of an arrogant jerk. I don't think you deserve any money back. You know what? You both got what you deserved. Get out of here. Right? That's sort of what I come to. I don't know if that story's true or based on a true story, but I do know that the lesson from it is very true. And that comes to another lesson, which is that there's no such thing as a perfect debate. There's no such thing as a perfectly balanced debate. And that would suggest that, I mean, we're humans. We're not perfect. So that would suggest to me that there's another argument in the Corax and Tisias debate that we're not privy to, to make the point. What does this have to do with Isocrates? Well, we're reading two works by Isocrates, Against the Sophists and Antidosis. I love that they rhyme. Against the, sort of in my brain, at least they rhyme. Against the Sophists isn't that hard to understand. He is writing a work against his former colleagues, the Sophists. See, Isocrates split from the Sophists and he went ahead and he created his own school. And he explains why. And I'm going to let you read from him why he felt that the Sophists were not great. They'll sound familiar. They charge too much. They only teach him for one situation. He has other reasons. It's about 3 pages. You'll make it through. But when he left the Sophists, he had to give an argument as to why he was leaving the Sophists. And so that's what this is. This is against the Sophists. He's accusing them of not being ethical teachers. That's it. Antidosis sounds like a really scary word. It sounds like a bad disease. But antidosis, if you understand your Latin very well, antidosis, anti, against, antidosis. There's some medical term for the dosis part. But essentially, it's not an antidote or an anecdote. It's antidosis in the sense that he was being accused in the public for not giving back to the community in the ways that he should, with the amount of money that he should. See, back then, if you were successful, particularly monetarily, you would build a ship for war, or you would build a building in memoriam, or you would contribute to a school in a financial way. And that as Isocrates was coming towards the end of his life, he was being told, there were whispers. Hey, people think that you did not do the job that you needed to do. You're not giving back your money. What are you doing? So he wrote this piece as not an apology, not as apologia, but as antidosis, as I'm sort of, prefronting or setting the stage for that accusal to come around so that I can defend myself. But if you're dead, you can't defend yourself. So he wrote this in anticipation that people would accuse him of these things because he was hearing it. So he wrote this piece in order for people to read if he were dead and they accused him of not giving back to the community the way he was supposed to. This piece would answer that criticism. That attack or accusing would be defended. And so what did he say? Well, he said a lot of things. First of all, he said, I did not make the amount of money you think I did. Yes, I was a sophist, but only for a time, and I did not charge that much, which is why I left the world of the sophists to teach, because that was more important. And I let students pay what the students could pay. I didn't charge outlandish fees. And I made sure that they didn't need to keep coming back to me every time they had a conflict that needed to be taken care of, because I taught them the rules of how to answer any attack on their character or on their material goods or on their land. In addition, I taught more students than the sophists did. And that means that I invested in my school. I invested in the true thing for democracy that is absolutely necessary, and that is the education of the citizenry. And I taught them how to do it right. And so now I don't have the money to build a ship or a building or anything else. So you're just going to have to take my school and my students as the legacy of Isocrates. He was also accused of the same thing that Socrates was accused of, which was, I believe that they called it, what did they call it? There's an official word for it. I don't remember, but essentially corrupting the youth. Think about that for a second, corrupting the youth. Do you think it was that he went around giving them like drugs or something, or that he went around telling them stories about that are inappropriate about crime or sex or violence or murder? No. What did they mean by corrupting the youth? Well, the bad news is they meant teaching the youth how to maneuver through the class system in government. Oops. In case you didn't know it, most of your professors do that all the time. They're constantly trying to tell you how to not revolt, but to function within successfully the systems of government and economics and social systems that we have set up. That's not corruption, it's education. And so Isocrates really sets this up as, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And I don't care who builds warships. I'm trying to keep us out of war, right? So when you read these three pieces this week, keep in mind that the Enchiridion Helen is to be enjoyed. And hopefully, he persuades you a little bit that maybe Helen was not to blame. And Isocrates is trying to establish the distinction between sophistry and rhetoric. Gorgias saw rhetoric as a tool, really, from what we understand of his work. Isocrates understood the link between rhetoric and being a part or functioning as part of the social system and the governmental system, the democracy, which at the time was different than our own, but was no less important. If you were going to function in democracy, you needed to have the knowledge to do so. And believe me, this did not necessarily make the Senate happy, because they wanted to keep and maintain their power as much as they could. And the more people you told the tricks to, the more people who would be qualified to be in the Senate. And then power would disperse even more. And Isocrates, that was his idea. Of course, let's spread knowledge to people so that they can engage the democratic process. All right, I'm done. But I love talking about this stuff. Maybe because we get to more detailed and less fun stuff eventually. But for right now, I gotta tell you, I love these two pieces, well, these two authors and the pieces that you're reading. I hope you enjoy them. They are, like I said, exceptionally short, but nonetheless, you may have trouble reading them because they are written a little bit awkwardly. So if you have any questions about the readings, post them to the Dear Professor discussion board online. I'm going to be checking it later today as well as this week. So let me know. And, if you put it on there, that shouldn't be a problem or anything, because your fellow students may learn something from your question and my answer as well. But if you're uncomfortable with that, of course, as always, you can email me or text me a question. In addition, I did not say this in the introductions or put it in the syllabus, and I'm not sure why, but just so you know, if you ever decide that you want to have a one-on-one meeting with me via Zoom, or a few of you want time for you to come on and talk and ask questions in real time on Zoom, I am more than willing to do that, and I'll work with your schedules as best that we can to make that happen. All right, everybody, you know what to do. Keep up. I'll be talking to you soon.